welcome back to Woven English, the place where every story makes you feel something and every word helps your English grow stronger. Today, I want to tell you a story. Not just any story. This is a story about a woman who had everything the world says you should want. Beauty, wealth, a palace, a prince, and yet she chose something far more powerful than all of that. She chose people. She chose to walk into hospitals when others walked away. She chose to hold the hands that others were afraid to touch. She chose to stand in minefields so that the world would pay attention to the lives being destroyed by them. Her name was Diana, and she was, without question, one of the most remarkable human beings who ever lived. By the time this story ends, I don't just want you to know about her. I want you to feel her. The way millions of people around the world felt her presence, her kindness, and even the weight of her absence. So, settle in. Take a breath, and let's begin. On the first day of July, in the year 1961, a baby girl was born in the county of Norfolk, England. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. She was the fourth of 5 children, born into a family with deep roots in British nobility. Her father, Edward John Spencer, held the title of Viscount Althorp. Her mother, Frances Roche, came from an equally distinguished family. On the surface, it looked like a perfect beginning, a grand estate, a privileged life, a future written in gold. But even from the very beginning, Diana was different. She had blue eyes. Not just any blue, but the kind of blue that seemed to hold whole skies inside them. She had a smile that arrived slowly, like sunrise, and when it came, it lit up every corner of the room. She was quiet, gentle, almost shy. And yet, there was something in her that pulled people toward her without effort. People who met Diana as a child often said the same thing. There was something special about that girl. Not just beauty, though she had plenty of that. Something warmer, something realer, something that made you feel, when she looked at you, that you were the only person in the world. That quality, that gift of making people feel seen, would become the most powerful thing about her. Not her title, not her fashion, not her famous face on magazine covers across the world. It was the way she made people feel. And it started long before anyone knew her name. Diana's early childhood was spent at Park House, a large home near Sandringham in Norfolk. She grew up surrounded by the English countryside, open fields, gray skies, the smell of rain on old stone walls. She loved animals deeply. Horses, dogs, small creatures, she would carry in her hands with extraordinary gentleness. She was also passionate about children. Even as a little girl, Diana was drawn to those who needed care. Younger children, vulnerable people, anyone who looked like they needed a soft word or a kind hand. Friends and family noticed early that Diana didn't just feel sympathy for people in need. She felt something deeper. She felt with them. But beneath this happy, gentle surface, life was not as perfect as it appeared. When Diana was just 7 years old, her world cracked open. Her parents, Edward and Frances, separated and eventually divorced. For a child, this is always painful. But for Diana, who was deeply sensitive and emotionally tuned in to the people around her, it was devastating. She later spoke about that time with great honesty. She remembered the sound of her mother's suitcases being packed. She remembered watching her leave. She remembered the silence that followed, a silence that no amount of privilege or comfort could fill. But here is the remarkable thing about Diana. Even as a child, she did not break. She was sad, yes, she was confused and hurt, as any child would be. But she found ways to hold herself together. She poured her love into her siblings. She poured it into the animals on the estate. She poured it into her care for others. And, in doing so, she began, without knowing it, to build the very foundation of the woman she would become. Resilience is not the absence of pain. Diana knew that better than anyone. Resilience is what you do with the pain. And from the very beginning, Diana turned hers outward, into compassion, into care, into connection with others. She attended several schools, though she was never considered an outstanding academic student. What she lacked in grades, she more than made up for in heart. Teachers remembered her as warm, responsible, and wonderful with younger children. She earned a nursery nurse certificate and worked with young children, and, by all accounts, she was exceptional at it. She loved to dance. She had real talent, graceful, fluid, joyful. She dreamed, for a time, of becoming a professional dancer, but she grew too tall, and that dream quietly closed its door. What she didn't know then was that a much bigger stage was waiting for her. In 1977, when Diana was just 16 years old, she crossed paths with a man named Prince Charles, the eldest son of Queen Elizabeth II and heir to the British throne. Their meeting was brief at first, unremarkable, even. But the world, it seemed, had other plans. By 1980, Charles had noticed Diana again, now a young woman of 19, working in London as a kindergarten assistant. She was warm, unpretentious, natural in a way that many people around Charles were not. She didn't perform for him. She didn't try too hard. She was simply herself. And that, to a man surrounded by ceremony and expectation his entire life, was irresistible. They began to spend time together. The media, ever watchful, caught wind of the relationship almost immediately. Photographers followed Diana. Headlines were written. The entire country seemed to hold its breath. And on February 24th, 1981, the news broke that the world had been waiting for. Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer were engaged. Diana was 20 years old. The ring he gave her was stunning. A 12-carat oval blue sapphire surrounded by 14 solitaire diamonds, set in 18-karat white gold. She chose it herself from a catalog. She wanted something real, something people could see, something that wasn't hidden away behind glass. Even in that small detail, Diana was Diana. The wedding was set for July 29th, 1981, and when that day arrived, the world stopped. It was held at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. 650,000 people lined the streets of London to watch the procession. 750 million people watched on television around the globe. It was, by every measure, the most watched event in broadcasting history at that time. Diana arrived in a glass coach, wearing a dress that has since become one of the most iconic in history. An ivory silk taffeta gown with a 25-foot train, hand-embroidered with 10,000 pearls and sequins. It took months to make. When she stepped out and the world saw her, there was a collective gasp. From the crowds in London, from living rooms across every continent. She walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, a walk of 3.5 minutes that felt like it lasted forever. Her eyes were soft, her smile a little nervous, a little joyful, a little impossible to look away from. She stumbled slightly over Charles's full name during the vows. She called him Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip Arthur George. The congregation smiled. The world smiled. It made her more human. It made her more loved. They were married. The fairy tale, it seemed, had begun. Within a year of the wedding, the world received more joyful news. Diana was expecting a child. On June 21st, 1982, Prince William was born. Diana was 21 years old, and from the first moment she held him, everyone who witnessed it understood. This was not just a princess holding an heir to the throne. This was a mother in the fullest and most beautiful sense of the word. Diana broke with royal tradition in quiet, determined ways. She was present for her son in ways the palace didn't always expect or encourage. She read to him. She played with him on the floor. She took him to school herself on his first day. A sight that surprised photographers and delighted the public in equal measure. In September 1984, Prince Harry arrived. The family was complete. Diana took her sons to theme parks. She took them to McDonald's. She arranged sleepovers with ordinary children. She wanted them to understand what real life felt like. Not just the guilt and ceremony of the palace, but the warmth and mess and laughter of the world beyond its walls. She once said that she wanted her sons to have an understanding of people's emotions, of their vulnerability. She believed that whoever they became, they needed to understand that people mattered, that feelings mattered. Those words were not just a mother's hopes for her children. They were a self-portrait. But even as the world looked at Diana and saw a fairy tale, the truth behind the palace walls was far more complicated. Her marriage to Charles was, in many ways, a deeply lonely experience. The two were fundamentally different people. In temperament, in interest, in emotional need, Charles was older, reserved, shaped by decades of royal duty. Diana was young, emotional, desperate for warmth and connection. The media attention, which had once felt exciting, became relentless. Every outfit was analyzed. Every expression was photographed. Every outing became a performance. Diana has spoken about feeling trapped, surrounded by crowds and cameras and people, and yet profoundly, painfully alone. She struggled with her mental health. She experienced depression, anxiety, and struggled with an eating disorder, battles she would later speak about with extraordinary openness at a time when no one in her position ever did such things. She once said she felt that the institution she had married into didn't understand her, that she was too emotional, too real, too human for a world built on distance and protocol. And yet, even in the depths of that pain, Diana did not disappear. She did not crumble. She adapted. She channeled what she was feeling into a fire, a burning need to reach out, to connect, to do something real for people who were suffering in ways far more desperate than her own. And that is where everything changed. In 1992, Charles and Diana formally separated. The divorce was finalized in 1996. The fairy tale was over. But Diana, the real Diana, the one the world would remember forever, was only just beginning. Free from the constraints of her royal role as Charles's wife, Diana threw herself into the work that mattered most to her. She had already been involved in charity work throughout her marriage. She was patron of numerous organizations, children's charities, hospices, organizations supporting homeless young people. But now, without the restrictions of her former role, she could do something more. She could commit fully and fearlessly to the causes that kept her up at night. The first of those causes was one that took enormous courage. In the 1980s and early 1990s, AIDS was one of the most feared diseases in the world. Not just feared, stigmatized. There was a widespread and devastating misunderstanding that HIV could be spread through casual contact, through touch, through proximity, through simply being near someone who was infected. This fear led to something heartbreaking. People dying of AIDS were often dying alone, abandoned by their communities, untouched, unloved, invisible. Diana changed that. In 1987, she visited a ward full of AIDS patients at the Middlesex Hospital in London. And in front of a bank of cameras, in front of the world, she reached out and shook hands with a patient, without gloves. That moment rippled across the planet. It sounds so simple. A handshake. But in that moment, Diana communicated something that no government announcement, no medical report, no public health campaign had managed to convey. These people are human beings. They deserve to be touched. They deserve to be seen. They are not something to be afraid of. They are someone to be loved. Overnight, attitudes began to shift. AIDS patients spoke of what it meant to them, that a princess, of all people, had not been afraid to touch them, that she had chosen to. The word dignity came up again and again. But Diana was far from finished. In January 1997, just months before her death, Diana traveled to Angola as part of a campaign by the Hallow Trust to raise awareness about landmines, the hidden, deadly explosives left behind in post-conflict zones that continued to kill and maim civilians, particularly children, long after the wars that placed them there had ended. Wearing a pale blue protect visor and a flak jacket, Diana walked through an active minefield. The photographs of that walk are extraordinary. A woman of extraordinary beauty, in extraordinary danger, in an extraordinary act of deliberate, chosen courage. She didn't have to be there. Nobody in her position had to be there. But she was there because she understood that visibility matters, that when the world sees, the world acts. Her campaign is widely credited with accelerating international action on landmines and contributing to the Ottawa Treaty of 1997, a landmark international agreement banning the use, stockpiling, production, and transfer of anti-personnel mines. Signed by more than 120 countries, it is estimated to have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. This was Diana's power. Not the power of a title, the power of presence. The power of choosing to show up in places where the world needed to look. She also worked tirelessly with organizations supporting homeless young people, with children's hospices, with cancer charities, with leprosy research. She brought the same quality to every cause she touched. She actually showed up. She sat with the sick. She held the dying. She listened to those who had not been listened to. She showed the world what it looked like when compassion wasn't just a sentiment, when it was a practice. In the summer of 1997, Diana seemed to be finding a new kind of happiness. She was enjoying her freedom. She was engaged in work she believed in. She was a mother who was deeply, actively, joyfully present in her sons' lives. On the night of August 30th, 1997, Diana was in Paris. In the early hours of August 31st, her car was involved in a crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. She was rushed to hospital, where surgeons fought to save her life. But at 4 minutes past 4 in the morning, Princess Diana died. She was 36 years old. The world's response was unlike anything in modern history. Flowers were laid outside Kensington Palace in their millions. Mountains of bouquets stretching as far as the eye could see. Notes were tucked between the petals, written by children, by grandmothers, by strangers who had never met her but felt with absolute certainty that they had lost someone who had mattered to them personally. people wept openly in the streets. Not just in Britain, around the world. Her funeral, held on September 6, 1997, was watched by 2.5 billion people, one of the largest television audiences ever recorded. As her coffin passed through the streets of London, lined with silent, weeping crowds, someone in the crowd began to clap. The applause spread through the thousands of people lining the route, a ripple of tribute moving through the grief. Her brother, Charles Spencer, gave a eulogy that ended with these words: "Of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age. She was buried on a small island in the lake on the grounds of Althorpe House, her childhood home, in a place that was peaceful and private, a place that belonged only to her, but her legacy did not stay there. It spread. Prince William and Prince Harry, her sons, have carried her spirit forward. Both have been deeply involved in mental health advocacy, a direct echo of their mother's willingness to speak openly about her own struggles. Harry has spoken publicly about grief, about therapy, about the importance of not suffering in silence. William and his wife Catherine founded the Heads Together campaign, bringing mental health out of the shadows in exactly the way Diana began to do decades before. The Diana Award continues to recognize young people who are changing the world through social action and humanitarian work, keeping her name alive in the next generation of changemakers. Her influence has touched fashion, charity, public discourse around mental health, the global movement against landmines, the way we understand the relationship between public figures and the people they serve. She changed what it meant to be a royal. She changed what it meant to be a public figure. She changed, in small but irreversible ways, what the world believed was possible when one person simply decided to care. So, what can we carry with us from Diana's story? Perhaps the first lesson is about authenticity. Diana was, at her core, relentlessly real. In a world full of performance and pretense, she insisted on being herself, vulnerable, emotional, human. And that authenticity was not a weakness. It was her greatest strength. It was the thing that made people trust her. It was the thing that made them love her. The second lesson is about courage. Not the courage of the warrior, though walking through a minefield requires something very close to that, but the quieter, more difficult courage of showing up, of choosing to be present where the world looks away, of deciding that the discomfort of you matters less than the suffering of them. That is a kind of courage most of us can practice in our own small ways every single day. And the third lesson, perhaps the most important of all, is that pain does not have to diminish you. Diana faced loss, loneliness, public humiliation, and private heartbreak. She faced it all in front of the entire watching world. And she did not let it make her smaller. She let it make her wider, more open, more committed, more human. She turned her wounds into windows and let the light of other people's suffering in. That is her story. That is her gift. And in some quiet way, it belongs to all of us. Princess Diana once said, "I don't go by the rule book. I lead from the heart, not the head." In a world that so often tells us to be careful, to be strategic, to protect ourselves, Diana led from the heart, every single day. And the world is more beautiful for it. She was not perfect. She would have been the first to tell you that. But she was real, and she was kind. And she showed us, in the way she lived and the way she loved, that those two things, realness and kindness, are perhaps the most powerful forces a human being can carry. Her life was short, but it was luminous, and somewhere, in every hand extended to a stranger, in every cause championed by the forgotten, in every moment when someone chooses compassion over comfort, Diana is still very much alive. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I'd love for you to share your answer in the comments below. Diana made a choice that many people in her position would never have made. She gave up the safety and comfort of royal distance to truly be with the people who were suffering. She chose presence over protection. If you were in Diana's position, with her fame, her platform, her influence, what cause would you choose to stand for? And why does it matter to you personally? Write it in the comments. I read every single one, and your answer might just inspire someone else who's reading today. If Diana's story moved you, if it reminded you of what one person can do when they lead with love, then give this video a like. It helps more people find stories like this one. And if you want to keep growing your English through powerful, meaningful stories, subscribe to Woven English. Every week, we bring you a new story. Real people, real lessons, real language. Stories that stay with you long after you stop listening. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today at Woven English. Take care of each other out there. Be a little kinder than yesterday. And we'll see you in the next story.